Specific learning disorder, SLD, represents a neurodevelopmental condition characterized by persistent difficulties in learning and using academic skills, despite adequate educational opportunity and instruction. This condition affects approximately 5 to 15% of school-aged children across different languages and cultures, making it one of the most common learning challenges encountered in educational settings worldwide. The current diagnostic framework recognizes three primary academic domains in which specific learning disorders manifest: reading, dyslexia; written expression, dysgraphia; and mathematics, dyscalculia. These difficulties emerge during the early school years and are marked by academic performance substantially below what would be expected given an individual's chronological age, measured intelligence, and age-appropriate education. Importantly, specific learning disorders are not attributable to intellectual disabilities, sensory impairments, neurological disorders, psychosocial adversity, inadequate educational instruction, or lack of proficiency in the language of academic instruction. Rather, they reflect specific neurodevelopmental differences in how the brain processes, stores, and retrieves information related to particular academic skills. The neurobiological foundations of specific learning disorders involve structural and functional differences in neural circuits specialized for processing specific types of information. Neuroimaging studies of dyslexia, the most extensively researched form of SLD, have identified differences in left hemisphere regions involved in phonological processing, particularly the temporoparietal and occipitotemporal areas critical for connecting written symbols with their corresponding sounds. In dyscalculia, neuroimaging reveals atypical function in parietal regions associated with numerical processing and spatial cognition. Research on dysgraphia suggests involvement of frontal parietal networks that coordinate visual spatial processing, fine motor control, and language functions necessary for written expression. These neurobiological differences appear to be largely genetic in origin, with heritability estimates ranging from 40 to 80% across different types of learning disorders. Environmental factors such as prenatal exposures, birth complications, and early childhood experiences may interact with genetic predispositions, influencing how these neural systems develop during critical periods of brain maturation. Dyslexia, the most prevalent form of specific learning disorder, affects approximately 80% of individuals with learning disabilities and is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and limited decoding abilities. These challenges stem from core deficits in phonological processing, the ability to identify and manipulate speech sounds, which compromise the development of sound symbol associations fundamental to reading acquisition in alphabetic writing systems. Common manifestations include slow, effortful reading with frequent errors, difficulty decoding unfamiliar words, phonological awareness challenges, such as rhyming or sound segmentation, poor spelling that may not follow phonetic patterns, and reading comprehension difficulties secondary to word recognition challenges. Despite these specific literacy-related difficulties, individuals with dyslexia often demonstrate strengths in reasoning, problem-solving, conceptual understanding, visual spatial thinking, and creative expression. Many successful entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, and innovators have dyslexia, highlighting that this condition represents a different pattern of cognitive processing rather than an overall learning deficit. Dyscalculia affects approximately 3 to 7% of the school-aged population and involves specific difficulties in processing numerical information, learning arithmetic facts, and performing accurate or fluent calculations. Children with dyscalculia typically struggle with number sense, the intuitive understanding of quantities and relationships between numbers, which forms the foundation for higher mathematical concepts. Common manifestations include difficulty with basic counting principles, slow or inaccurate retrieval of arithmetic facts, inefficient calculation procedures, challenges in mathematical reasoning, and anxiety when faced with numerical tasks. These difficulties extend beyond academic settings to impact everyday activities involving numerical processing, such as managing money, telling time, measuring quantities, and estimating distances. As with other specific learning disorders, dyscalculia exists alongside intact or even exceptional abilities in other cognitive domains, with many affected individuals demonstrating strengths in verbal reasoning, creative thinking, and conceptual understanding of non-numerical information. Dysgraphia involves persistent difficulties with written expression, typically manifesting as problems with spelling, grammar, punctuation, and the organization and coherence of written text. This disorder may exist independently or co-occur with reading or mathematics disorders. Handwriting challenges are common, with affected individuals often producing illegible or laboriously formed letters, inconsistent spacing between words, and unusual positioning on the page. Beyond these mechanical aspects of writing, individuals with dysgraphia frequently struggle with the higher-order processes of written composition, including generating ideas, organizing content logically, and revising text effectively. The cognitive demands of transcribing thoughts into written language may overwhelm working memory resources, limiting the attention available for content generation and revision. Despite these specific challenges with written expression, many individuals with dysgraphia demonstrate strong verbal expression, creative thinking, and conceptual understanding when these abilities can be demonstrated through non-written formats. The impact of specific learning disorders extends far beyond academic performance to affect psychological well-being, social relationships, and long-term educational and occupational outcomes. Without appropriate intervention and support, children with learning disorders often experience frustration, diminished self-esteem, and negative attitudes toward education as they encounter repeated academic difficulties despite genuine effort. Anxiety and depression rates are elevated among this population, with many developing secondary emotional and behavioral challenges in response to persistent academic struggles. Social relationships may be affected when learning differences interfere with peer activities or when children withdraw from social interaction due to embarrassment about their academic challenges. Long-term studies indicate that without effective intervention, learning disorders are associated with higher rates of school dropout, reduced post-secondary education participation, more limited employment opportunities, and lower lifetime earnings compared to peers with similar cognitive abilities, but without learning disorders. Comprehensive assessment represents the essential first step in addressing specific learning disorders, involving multiple methods and sources of information to identify patterns of strengths and challenges. Psychoeducational evaluation typically includes standardized measures of cognitive abilities, academic achievement across domains, information processing skills such as phonological awareness, processing speed, and working memory, and consideration of social-emotional functioning. Effective assessment moves beyond simply documenting below-average academic performance to identify specific cognitive processes contributing to learning difficulties, distinguish between primary learning disorders and secondary factors such as anxiety or motivation, and develop targeted intervention recommendations. The goal of assessment is not merely classification but understanding the individual's unique learning profile to inform personalized educational planning. Early identification is particularly valuable as intervention during the early elementary years, when neuroplasticity is heightened and negative academic experiences have had less time to accumulate, tends to yield more substantial improvements in academic skills and associated self-concept. Evidence-based interventions for specific learning disorders typically involve explicit, systematic instruction targeting the specific skill deficits identified through assessment. For dyslexia, structured literacy approaches emphasizing systematic phonics instruction, phonological awareness training, fluency development, vocabulary building, and comprehension strategies have demonstrated effectiveness across age groups. Mathematics interventions for dyscalculia focus on developing number sense through concrete manipulatives, visual representations of numerical concepts, explicit strategy instruction, and sufficient practice for skill automaticity. Writing interventions address both mechanical aspects through handwriting instruction or technology accommodations and compositional processes through explicit teaching of planning, drafting, and revising strategies. Effective interventions share common features including high levels of structure, explicit instruction in foundational skills, multisensory presentation of information, cumulative review of previously learned material, and sufficient opportunity for practice to develop automaticity. The intensity and specificity of intervention should match the severity of the learning disorder, with more significant difficulties requiring more intensive, specialized approaches. Accommodations and assistive technology play critical roles in supporting individuals with learning disorders, providing alternative pathways for accessing information and demonstrating knowledge. Common accommodations include extended time for assignments and assessments, modified homework expectations, reduced copying requirements, and provision of notes or outlines. Assistive technology options have expanded dramatically in recent years, including text-to-speech software for reading support, speech-to-text applications for writing assistance, calculators and math tools for computational support, graphic organizers for planning written work, and organizational tools for managing assignments and materials. The selection of appropriate accommodations and technologies should be individualized based on specific learning challenges, developmental level, and environmental demands, with the goal of maximizing independence and academic success while maintaining appropriate challenge. Rather than replacing skill development, these supports allow individuals to access grade-level curriculum while continuing to develop fundamental skills through targeted intervention. The transition to post-secondary education and employment presents both challenges and opportunities for individuals with specific learning disorders. Higher education settings typically require greater independence in learning, time management, and self-advocacy than secondary schools, while offering less structured support. Successful transition involves developing self-awareness about specific learning needs, understanding legal rights to reasonable accommodations, and building self-advocacy skills to request appropriate supports. Many individuals with learning disorders discover that post-secondary programs and career paths aligned with their cognitive strengths allow them to minimize the impact of specific challenges while capitalizing on areas of talent. Research indicates that factors predicting positive adult outcomes include early intervention, development of compensatory strategies, self-awareness and acceptance of learning differences, supportive family environments, and opportunities to develop talents in areas of strength. Many successful adults with learning disorders report that their experiences navigating academic challenges fostered resilience, problem-solving skills, and determination that proved valuable throughout their careers. Contemporary approaches to specific learning disorders have increasingly adopted a neurodiversity perspective, recognizing these conditions as variations in brain function that include both challenges and potential strengths rather than simply deficits requiring remediation. This framework acknowledges the genuine difficulties associated with learning disorders while also recognizing that different patterns of cognitive processing may confer advantages in certain contexts. For example, the same visual spatial processing style that creates challenges for reading may support exceptional abilities in architecture, engineering, or visual arts. The creative thinking and novel connections observed in many individuals with learning disorders may contribute to innovation and problem-solving across multiple fields. This balanced perspective supports intervention approaches that address specific skill deficits while simultaneously nurturing strengths and developing compensatory strategies. The ultimate goal is not to normalize learning, but to develop the specific skills necessary for academic and life success, while fostering self-acceptance, resilience, and recognition of the unique contributions that diverse learning profiles bring to communities, educational environments, and workplaces.